How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Leonardo Gonzalez here, and today let's going to now explore about the CSS, the fundamental of CSS. Why do we even care as a JavaScript developers? And what are the fundamental topics that we need to learn, and especially to quickly access to these fundamentals? Why? Because anytime that we need to describe something, in CSS, I want to be effective, proficient, and succinct when it comes to bring some technology or bring some features to our clients, right? So regardless how fancy is a particular thing that you want to, or the client needs to, you can be the right person who can implement that. And because of that, right? So since this is a course that is taught by Josh Comio, a software engineer that has previously worked at Khan Academy and also at Gatsby, and now he has is this particularly academy. Okay, this model is made of. It's interesting that I didn't put it here, but I suppose. Well, this is a 10 models course where allegedly you're going to dedicate is like 1 hour and a half or 3 hours depending of your pace. In my case might be a little bit longer or not, who knows. But the thing here is so far we have looked at the introduction and the fundamental of the model 0. Okay, and in the introduction is how do you learn. This is some debatable because it's very narrow specific to the individual. There are some studies that come out that you can do this interleaving, blocking versus interleaving. I'm not gonna dive deep too much into this. The other is the error corrections. I will lean into this because as these Andrew Huberman, these neuroscientists, and this neuroscientists and ophthalmology of Stanford School of Medicine made, he say, hey, one of the best way to activate your neuroplasticity is by doing things that you know that you are not good, that you are not good at it. Do it with an intention and invite you to learn through the error that you made along the way. That doesn't mean that you're gonna load weapons and start shooting people to say, oh, I learned that I shouldn't do that. No. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that anytime that you are trying to learning something in the safe space as much as possible, right? These errors that you're going to do, you're going to pass through, is an invitation for your brain to recalibrate itself to see, hey, what you think is not giving you the outcome, it's not giving you the expected result. So it's now this particular approach in this particular context that it is what it is. So this is the TLDR of the entire intro here, all right? And how now this is in this course is broken up into 10 models, where each model you can think of this like a mini course that it should take like 3 or 6 hours. Again, it's gonna depend of your pace. And we have an estimate to end this in the next 20 days. I don't think that'll be feasible or possible. Who knows, you know? But the idea is that understand the fundamentals of each one of those models. What are the value proposition for each of them? And therefore, we can now, anytime we need to look at this fundamental, we can quickly access through. So how can we do that? By first looking at the most common concepts here. And this is, if you want to get yourself familiar with this is an introductory article from MDN, where the quick overview of this is to first understand what CSS is, and then how you can now add styles to your document, whether it's external files or internal files or inline, all right? and then how you can now select elements, right? Using the common selectors, whether it's an element or a class, as well as the combinators of the selectors, such as the selector, the descendant selector, which is we're using a space, or the next to sibling using the plus, right? And how you can also combine the selectors with that. And some additional features such as functions, all right? The other is like call function or transition functions or background functions and color function, and the other is the add rules, which is adding behavior, is in telling to CSS how should behave, right? So for example, how you should behave giving a particular viewport with media, how you should behave when it comes to find external files using import, how you should behave to define several cascading styles, right, using layers, how you define the different animations or the intermediate frames in the animation sequence, the keyframe. The other is the view transition. How you animate is the transition from one to another in a single page or in a multi-page application. So again, developing these notions, lay out the fundamentals here, and the other is a shorthand property and comments. But the TLDR of this is to slowly but progressively understand is what CSS is, how can we add now style here, how can we select elements and combinators using the most common, right? Because this is a high level. And then the additional features of the language, which is functions such as call, import, such as call, import, media, layer, keyframe, and the which is part of the the functions, the CSS functions, like color, call, translate, all right, background colors, right, the add rules, which indicate is behaviors, all right, media, layer, keyframe, view transition. This is important to distinguish this because now you can have a mental model here. Okay, when you say, okay, what we need to do here? Oh, we need to add some sort of behaviors. Okay, I want you to do this. We can check this if we need to add a behavior. So for example, with add rules, or we want is to, for example, let's say select all of these different elements. Right? We can go with a selector and combinators, right? Or we can say, hey, we want this to only import at some point is this style sheets and not any longer, right? Or import more style sheets as we load our applications. So using now external CSS. But again, the idea here is to develop this intuition about these fundamentals of what CSS is. How can we add styles to this using the most common selectors, such as in combinators, all right? So elements or class or combinators like descendant selectors, or the next sibling, all right? The other is the next child, another one. But again, it's the selectors and combinators, and then the advanced or the additional features such as functions, all right, like, well, call, color, transitions, among other functions, right? Or adding behavior is like how I want CSS behave with add rules, right? Media, import, keyframes, layer. I'm not quite familiar with layer, but this is actually part of the CSS, and you're gonna see that a lot in Tailwind. Yep. And also view transitions. And then you have now the shorthand properties, because some properties or some declarations, okay, some declarations here, which is the property and the value. That's a declaration. Some declarations like margin, padding, border, or background actually can be expressed in a set of several ways, right? In a different ways. So there are shorthands that help us to deal with those. And last but not least, the comment. So with this foundation, all right? So we can quickly access to that theme. So anytime that you are going to explore CSS, you know at least the high level overview of this. It's like, hey, good. Now, once we explore the current model here as a way to recap this particular concepts, such as select the property from this snippet, and you say, well, the property is this text, all right? So properties are properties in CSS are the attributes. Okay, select the property or the attributes here that you can specify that how this element will look like. Select the selector. All right, in this case we're using is a class, but it can be an element, it can be an other type of selectors. All right. The other is the first declaration, is to say, hey, well, this now is an expression of or is this combination between a property and a value, right? The selector, as I mentioned again, another example, the rule, which is the entire thing, all right? Remember, CSS is based on rules that will apply or should apply to elements, to a set of elements or only one, okay? This is the rules, this is the style that you're gonna look like. The other is select the unit, for example, this, all right, which can be expressed in pixels, view height, view width, percentage, root element as well, so on and so forth, right? Select the second declaration, in this case, the entire thing, all right? And select the first rule below, which is this one. The rule, this one, this one. All right. Then, now with those fundamentals, right? So now with those fundamentals, once we explore the anatomy of a style, we are able to describe what it's doing. And now we look at the media queries, which is one of the things, okay? And we look media queries because this is something that is being used here. So in order to accommodate a screen of different shapes and size, CSS features media query, which allows to apply different CSS in different scenarios. I am quite familiar with this media query, okay? Let me see that in fact Okay, so let's get into this. So, all right. So once we look at the anatomy of the style, okay, which just a way to recap this. Next is the media queries. Why this is important? Why this is useful? As you remember, this is part of the fundamentals of CSS to tell CSS, hey, I want you to behave in this way, all right? CSS, I want you to behave in this way. And here is to say, hey, let's go into now apply some basic styles to a particular element here. Right now, I'm not able to show that because legal stuff and yada yada. Yeah, legal stuff and yada yada. So, but we got this, right? And a good example of this is like this, right? So you have this particular code, all right, and this must show when the max width is 300, okay, up to the up to the width is 300 is going to show this as red, all right. Once that exceeds that, so it's not going to apply that. So, all right, the other is about this playground. The playground use iframes, and iframe is an embedded HTML document within the main HTML document. It is a page within a page. So when you resize the parse, okay, it is a page within a page. So it is like a mini browser. When you resize the partition between code and preview, you resize in the embedded document. The media query run in the context of that inner page, like this. So this is running inside of this context. So we can think of this iframe. So claw here. So we can think of this iframe here. A browser within are like a tab within a tab. Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. An iframe, an inline frame, is essentially like having a mini browser window embedded within. Okay, makes a lot of sense, you know. So an iframe is like an embedding document. In other words, it's like having a mini, all right. In other words, like having a mini browser. It's like having a mini browser window embedded within a page. It's like having a mini browser window embedding within the page. Just like you can have multiple tabs open in your browser, each showing different website, and iframe lets you display content from another source right inside of the current page. For example, when you see a YouTube video embedded on a blog post, that's often an iframe. The video player is actually loading content from YouTube servers, but it appears seamlessly integrated into the blog page you are viewing. So it's like you're having this mini browser that you import, that you define your own HTML document and a script. Inside of that script, you import that, or you embedded that content, that video here. The key difference is that while browsers tabs are separate and you switch between them, an iframe show it is content simultaneously along the main page content. It is more like having a picture-in-picture view where you can see both the main page and the embedding. So while we are talking about iframes, since we are using, why are we talking about this? Since the course is using this sandpack, since the course is using sandpack, and embedded ID in your browser. So so sandpack. Okay, so sandpack is using an iframe to load the embedded iframe. Exactly. Sandpack, Go Sandbox, Embedding, Go Editor use an iframes to create an isolated environment for running code. Exactly. So this is creating an isolated environment to run that code, or for running code. That's interesting, and this is the power of this. A complete browser environment. The main page loads sandpack, which then creates an iframe that contains a complete browser environment. Holy moly! Oh my god! A complete browser environment, the code editor interface, and the preview output area where your code runs. So it has now a complete browser environment, the code editor interface, exactly, and the preview output of where your code runs. That's mind-bending stuff, bro. That's mind-bending stuff. That's what we are mentioning here. Okay. So, hiding content. Alright, so with media query, you can also is to say, hey, I want to now hide a content. You say hiding content. Hiding. Oh my god. Hiding content. Like this. So hiding content. From the next code, okay, we can say that that all elements in which class name is a large screen, okay, it will remove from the rendering process that element when it's this one. Exactly. This is a small screen. It will remove from the rendering process those elements in plural, those elements can be singular or multiple, those elements when the mean width is less than 300 pixels. So we'll take a look at this. So it will now say I will only show is small screen like this. As it. So display none is a declaration that removes an element from the rendering process, which is this. That the element in which class name is a small screen, display node will remove from the rendering process those elements here. Nice. Okay, anyway. Now, now that we got this, I got it up. Yeah, it's like, I get it. All right, good. Now, move on. Okay, valid conditions. Inside the parentheses, we typically use either max width or min width. Okay, the syntax looks quite a lot of like the declaration syntax, especially since max width 2023 is a valid CSS declaration. Unfortunately, this is misleading in the context of a media query. Max width is a media feature, not a CSS property. Exactly. Is a at rule. Media query is how now the CSS is going to behave, is a feature of the CSS, not a property. Oh, max width is a media feature, not a CSS property. They just happen to share the same name. Oh, interesting. So for this case, valid conditions. Okay, okay. So valid conditions. Okay, we got this. So not valid since font size can be querying. It happens that max width and min width is a media feature. Okay, max width, min width, or max width is a media feature. Is a media feature, not a CSS property. Okay, not a property inside of a rule. It's a feature from media, and much more come in the model files. We'll go way deep into media queries and responsive development. Building adaptive responsive interface is a huge part of mastering CSS and will not be neglected in this course. Then we look at the selectors. Okay, selectors. Finally, selectors. Selectors. Favorite topic, right? Selectors. So CSS comes with an incredible reach of selectors, and those selectors can be mixed and matched in interesting ways. So the most straightforward selector target a specific tag or class. So your target is a tag or a class. Okay, the most straightforward selector target. So the most straightforward selectors target a specific. So target specific tag or class. Such as this tag or class, right? A tag or a class. Within the Model.js ecosystem, however, we often rely on toolings to generate this selector for us. With the Model.js, with the modern JavaScript ecosystem, within the model JavaScript ecosystem, however, we often rely on tools to generate this selector for us. Okay, so within the model JavaScript ecosystem, we tend to rely on tools to generate this selector for us. We tend to rely on this selectors for us. We tend to rely on tooling, okay, to generate this selector for us. Okay, we tend to rely toolings to generate these selectors, to generate this selector for us. For this reason, we won't focus too much on them in this course. So for this reason, we won't focus too much of them in this course, but it's important to know that they exist. There are, however, many nifty selectors that come in handy even with modern tooling. In the lessons that follow, we'll cover a few common ones. Okay. However, many nifty selectors that come in handy even with modern tooling. Many nifty selectors that comes. Many nifty selectors that comes. Okay. There are, however, many nifty selectors that come in handy even with modern tooling. In the lesson that follow, we'll cover a few common ones. Exactly. However, many nifty selectors that come, however, exactly, is this one. However, many nifty selectors that come in handy even with modern tooling. Exactly. Many nifty selectors that come in, exactly. However, there are, however, many nifty selectors that comes in handy even with modern tooling. We'll cover a few common ones, and we'll cover a few common ones. And here is the reason why we are looking at this. We want us to focus on those that are time effective, that we're gonna encounter them. Okay, such as pseudo-class, Wait, what? Such as pseudo. Okay, this is the nifty selector that comes in handy. Okay, even with modern tooling, because most of the time we already have. So, for example, view, when you use a scope, actually generates a hash for that. Okay, so view generates that hash for you. There are, however, many nifty selectors that comes in handy even with modern tooling. We'll cover a few ones. Okay. Absolutely. Exactly. There are, however, many of them. So one of them is the Pseudo-Classes. Okay, exactly. It is selectors. Exactly. That is Pseudo-Classes. All right. Like this. Let's say we have a bottom and we want to change its text color when hover over it. Pseudo-Classes. These pseudo-classes or selectors, all right, to indicate. Oh, that's another. Yeah, I remember. Okay, let's go to recap a little bit here, shall we? So here we're going to look is at the most nifty selectors that even with modern tooling it comes handy. It comes in hand. It comes that comes in handy even with modern tooling. Okay, so that is these state-based selectors. You want to apply a rule. All right. So we have now is the how do you call it? Okay. So I just want to make a quick recap here with these fundamentals. One. So with CSS, we have now is, well, what is CSS? What is CSS? And then how you can add class to the document. And then how you can is now, how you can add class to your document. How you can select elements into your document, whether it is tags or class or even combinators like Descendant, selectors or the next sibling, and also state-based. This is important, man. State-based selectors. For example, pseudo-classes and pseudo-elements, right? So for example, we have is a hover here, which are some of this nifty nifty selector that comes in handy even with modern tooling, because in the JavaScript modern ecosystems there are a lot of tools that actually generate this selector for us. However, there are a few of them that are very useful. One of them is the pseudo-classes. Pseudo-classes let you apply chunks of CSS based on elements' current state. In this case, we are adding a blue text color when the element is hover. So when you hover, a blue text color. That's right. So this is similar our own mouse enter and mouse leave events in JavaScript, but with built-in state management. If there were to do this in JavaScript, we need to register event listener, but we also need to manage the state somehow to know if the element is currently being hovered. As a result, CSS make this kind of things much more simple. This, oh my god, this is the core of all of this. There are lots and lots of pseudo classes, and we'll learn about many of them throughout this course. For now, let's pick a couple more. Okay. But interesting what this is describing here. What this is describing. Okay. So this is similar to on mouse enter or on mouse leave. On mouse enter or mouse leave event. Okay, this is similar on this event. Okay, in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, but with built-in state management, bro. And I will highlight this because it is important to understand this, since this state-based and this state-based selectors, what it's doing is behind the scenes, CSS is handling is the state for us, so we don't have to do that. And that's huge, bro. Because if you're writing this React application and all that kind of stuff, you end up having to deal with this kind of stuff, like how do you call with this different states inside of your components, and that can be mind blowing if you have a lot of things to keep track of. For small things, which is at the end of the day, that's what we want to, yes. But as our application grows in its complexity, and we have to cover most business use cases and more PRD and so on and so forth, things become wild a little bit. But with built-in state management, exactly. If we do this in JavaScript, we'll need to listen for the event. Okay, well, we need to register the event listener. So listen for the event, or aka register the event listener exactly. We need to listen for the event, register the event listeners into an element, okay, into a tag, into an HTML tag, okay. If we do this in JavaScript, we'll need to listen for the event, register the event listener into an HTML tag. All right. No, what about this? Okay. And then manage the state, and manage internally the state, and manage the state somehow. Exactly. To know if the element is currently being hovered or not. In this case, to know if the element or if the tag is currently hovered or not. All right. Okay. The other is focus, right? So for example, here we look at the hover. Again, we're looking is at the most common, and the other is the focus. HTML come with interactive elements like button, links, and form inputs. When we interact with one of these elements, either by clicking, it becomes focus. It will capture keyboard inputs so we can type into a form field and enter. So when it's focus, so when it's focus, and when it's focus. But this state management is being handled by CSS. Holy moly, bro. Try to focusing on this button and try to activate the focus style here. So for example, like this. And this is now the code. Where you set the rule and say any button which state is this, any tag which state is this, you get this. For most users, a button can be focused by clicking on it. Focus can then be moved between buttons by pressing tabs to go forward or shift plus tab to go backwards. On macOS, things work a bit different. Depending on the browser, you're going to go into that direction. On most browsers, you go by into that. You can go backwards. Holy fuck. Oh crap. You can go forward or backwards with tab or tab plus shift. Okie dokie, bro. Interesting. Why do focus styles matters? Exactly. Why you may wonder why focus styles are necessary. Why it is helpful to know which element is focus. Focus styles are primarily useful for folks who don't use a pointer style input device, like a mouse and trackpad or a finger on a touch. For example, I built the foundation of this course platform without the use of keyboard or mouse. Due to a repetitive stress injury, initially, I did all my navigation by voice. Due to a repetitive stress injury, initially, I did all of my navigation by voice, speaking tab into a microphone to move between focus elements. The focus styles show you where you are on the page, which element is selected. Fortunately, browsers don't come with default focus styles. It varies by browsers, but it is typically either a blue or dotted outline. We'll talk about focus outline later in this course. But please don't add outline none to get rid of the focus outline unless you are replacing it with an even more prominent set of styles. We'll touch on accessibility concerns throughout this course. If you're looking to dive deeper into accessibility, I'll recommend is go to Ali Coffee here. Do the deploy on Friday and make it accessibility and make it an accessibility fix. Ally I11G testing is like making coffee. Pick your serving size and web accessibility information. Intro, what is a web accessibility and why it is important? The case for web accessibility. The United Nations Convention of the Right of Person with Disability, and it is an interest, accessibility supports social inclusion for people with disability, older people, people in rural areas, people in developing countries. The Web Content Accessibility Guideline. The four guiding principles of accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I think this is eclectic. This is interesting. Gary Fisher with minimal. Okay. The thread reader. This is a thread app here. Okay, okay. Exactly. Maintains the web content accessibility guidelines here. The goal of WCA is to provide a single shared standard for the web. Again, standards. The following section is almost verbatim a tweet thread by Carrie Fisher. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Questions to consider and examples. And what is accessibility?
Web accessibility perspectives. Video captions. Video isn't just about pictures, it's also about sound. Without the audio, you'd have to guess what this film is about. Frustrating, isn't it? Not knowing what's going on. That's the situation for everyone who can't hear. Captions make videos accessible. Not knowing. Frustrating, isn't it? Not knowing what's going on. That's the situation for everyone who can't hear. Captions make videos accessible. Which is also handy for people who want to watch video in loud environments, or where you need to be very, very quiet. Colors with good contrast. There's something about great design that allows it to go practically unnoticed. But it doesn't take much to make things confusing and frustrating. Choosing colors with poor contrast makes navigating, reading, and interacting a real pain. Good design means sufficient contrast between foreground and background colors. If it's simple for people with low contrast sensitivity, applications can be recognition. Sometimes it's just easier to speak. One of the
19th century architecture.
Dictating emails.
Send email to Jack Harding.
Or controlling your navigation app. Many people with physical disabilities rely on voice recognition to use the computer.
Place order.
But for that to happen, websites and apps need to be properly coded.
Go. Cancel.
Voice recognition can help lots of other people with temporary limitations too, like an injured arm.
Place order.
It can also prevent injuries becoming worse, like RSI, repetitive stress injury, or for people simply preferring voice.
Text-to-speech.
Some people can't see the text on the screen. Fortunately, computers can convert text to speech.
It's technology that many people who are blind have been relying on for years. But it's also important for many people with dyslexia, and very useful for people with difficulty reading text, as well as some people who just like to multitask. But for this to work, websites and apps have to be properly coded, which has the added benefit of helping search engines index websites' contents better.
Okay, exactly.
Clear layout and design. Poor layout can be very frustrating. And the same applies to the web. Good design involves good layout. Navigator will get frustrated with bad layout and design. Complex layouts also make finding information difficult or impossible for people with visual disabilities. And they are confusing for people with cognitive and learning disabilities who need clarity and consistency of the presentation.
Se le da.
Bad design also impacts anyone who isn't particularly confident
Fair
around
use.
computers. Notifications and feedback. All the right gears can be put in motion. The hands can be at the exact place they need to be. But if you don't get the feedback from us, the
Yeah, but this is okay. This is getting into
to hit us thread the
this
journey
particular
might be
accessibility
moving
here.
around.
Customizable. Customization isn't always just a question of preference, though. Sometimes it's a necessity. Being able to adjust the text is crucial for people with low vision and dyslexia. Properly coded websites and applications allow the text to be customized. For example, to change its size, spacing, font, and colors without loss of functions or clarity. Understandable content. Instead of saying, to postulate a conceit more irksome than being addressed in sesquipedalian syntax is adamantine, it is better to say, being spoken to in unnecessarily long and complicated language is a pain. Yet many websites lack structuring, using headings.
Ability.
And the other is
Many
keyboard
people use
compatibility.
only the keyboard to navigate websites, either through preference or circumstance, disability, or simply a broken mouse. The result is the same. Websites and apps need to be operable by keyboard. Web accessibility, essential for some, useful for all. Visit w3.org/WAI.
That particular perspective was important, at least in this context, because it's a why we're gonna see, okay, why focus style matters so much. Why focus style matters so much. Okay, why does focus styles matter so much? Why do focus styles why do focus styles matter? But in plural, why do focus styles matter? Okay. The TLDR is through accessibility concern. Focus styles are primarily useful for folks who don't use pointer style input device, like a mouse, trackpad, or finger or touch. For example, I built the foundation of this core platform without the use of a keyboard mouse due to a repetitive stress injury. Initially, I did all my navigation by voice, speaking tab into a microphone to move between focus tab. Holy moly, bro. Jesus. Holy. And the accessibility. Oh, you put now all of his accessibility here. That's interesting. Oh, you can show this into an switch to accessibility tree view. Oh, crap. To an accessibility. Okay. Tree view. Holy fudge. Alright. And all of the script that is loading, and all of the iframe that is embedding as well. Holy crap. And then you have this one. Data test.type slug. And then you have now all of the styles that are applying inline here to provide now true model CSS. Alright. And a type sidebar, and so on and so forth. Okay. So the TLDR of why do focus styles matter? Okay. Why it is helpful to know which element is focus. Focus styles are primarily used for folks who don't use a pointer. It is mainly it is mainly useful for folks who don't use pointer style or pointer style input device. Pointer style input device. Mouse, trackpad, okay, a finger on a touch screen. A finger on a touch screen, right? Okay, for example, I build the foundation of this course based on that. So in other words, for accessibility. That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. For accessibility here. And the other is check for input. But again, all of them are, so CSS is managing the state internally for us. The other is check. So pseudo-class only applies to checkbox and radar buttons that are filled in. You can apply additional styles to indicate the input and is activated. Exactly. To checkbox. So this only applies to checkboxes and radio buttons. Exactly. So for example, like this. But that's interesting here is like, holy moly, bro. Okay. First and last child. Okay. First and last child is another one that is important to care, that we care about here. They required a lot of space under the final paragraph. Why is it symmetrical? The problem here is the rule like this. The rule is meant to add space between each paragraph. Between each paragraph, but it also applies to the final paragraph. We can see this in DevTools. So if we don't want to apply that to again, very, very, very common and stupid or silly. That's not stupid, it's silly examples here. Okay, to say, hey, the last element here, I want to now be that, right? State base. It is a state base here. All right. Exactly. So here you're telling is that also select is by it is a state. So you're gonna control that and say, hey, I don't want you to add more margin to this. Or the first element. Last child pseudo-class will not select p tags, which are the final elements within a container. For conditional logic here. What about the first of type or the last tile? First child and last child, we also have the first of type and last of type. They're almost identical, but they have one critical difference. Depend on the type of the HTML. For example, let's suppose you have the following setup. The first child within the parent section tag is H1. Our P first child is looking for situation where paragraph is the first child within a parent container. Oh, within a parent container. It doesn't work in this case. But if we switch the selector to first of type, okay. So you say first here, it doesn't work. The first child within the parent section tag is on H1, and our P first child is looking for a situation where a paragraph is the first child within the parent container. It doesn't work in this case. But if we switch to the selector of the first type of, we take that. It's because the first child, find the first child. Okay, find if the first child in this section is a paragraph. If it is, good. But if you change this and say something like this, right, and rerun, what the fuck? Doesn't work. I love it. So this doesn't work. Okay. What about the first of last type? This check or this select by the tag type, whereas the first child is looking for the first element that match a selector from a parent. For example, like this. For example, like this. Okay, holy moly. Exactly. Okay. Okay. So to fix this, you do is this. Again, we are looking here is at the most common scenarios here, right? At the most common scenarios here. Okay, the other are pseudo-elements. Okay, pseudo-elements are like pseudo-classes, but they don't target a specific state. Instead, they target sub-elements within an element. They target sub-element within an element. Give me a second here. Exactly. So pseudo-class is because it is state-based. Each particular element might have its different. So here we're looking at the most common. Okay? Which, okay, that's interesting. I'll do that. Great. Good. Okay, and the other is pseudo-elements. Are like pseudo-classes, but they don't target specific state. Instead, they target sub-elements within an element. This okay, so pseudo-elements. This is now pseudo-element. Instead of targeting state, it targets, because at the end of the day they are selectors, right? It targets it targets sub-elements within an element. Within an element. Okay. For example, we can style the placeholder text in a form input with placeholder. Okay. Hey, the placeholder here, or the rules that I want to apply to these sub-elements, placeholder is this. That's interesting. In terms of syntax, pseudo-elements use 2 columns instead of 1, though some pseudo-elements are supported single column syntax. Okay. Pseudo-elements use 2 columns. I'm going to put this. And then now you have pseudo-classes. All right. Exactly. Unlike pseudo-classes, which use single column, We haven't explicitly creating a placeholder element, but by adding it by a placeholder attribute to the input tag, a pseudo element is created. This is why they call pseudo elements. They select a target in the DOM that we haven't explicitly created with HTML tag. Pseudo elements, placeholder, and accessibility. You may have heard that placeholders are bad for accessibility and shouldn't be used. My personal opinion is that they are right to use when they use properly. The trouble is that many developers use them improperly. Placeholders are criticized because the text is typically very light. It somehow has poor vision. They might not be able to read the text at all. Here's the thing, though. Placeholders aren't meant to contain critical information. They are meant to provide an example, to give folks an idea about how to format their data. They should never be used to label as an input. Use a label element instead. Exactly. What if the user can't read the placeholder or enter data in a correct format? First, we should build forms that are flexible and support a wide range of user inputs. With the power of JavaScript, we can transform their input into standardized formats. But if they really do enter invalid data, a helpful error message should be shown. It should explain what the user did wrong and how to fix it. And it should be bright and high contrast. Here's a quick test that you can check if you're using placeholder correctly. If you were to remove all placeholder from the form, would you still be usable and easy to fill out? If the answer is no, you have some work to do. Before and after. Two of the most common pseudo elements are before and after. Exactly. If you want to now add some pseudo elements like placeholder, okay, so for example, like placeholder, pseudo element, placeholder. Again, we're still talking about is this pseudo element, this selector. Okay, we're still talking about this elements, pseudo elements. This is why they are called pseudo elements. This selector targets element in the DOM that we haven't explicitly created with HTML tag. The other is before and after. If we do this, prefer to do this. Oh crap. The other is the before and after, but again lowercase. Is to indicate, well, is to put now pseudo elements or sub elements before or after the element, right? Are really just secret spans, nothing more. It's a syntactical sugar. In general, we probably shouldn't use these two pseudo elements. In a vanilla HTML CSS world, it can be helpful to bundle content within a CSS selector. In the era of components, however, we have better ways to bundling content. There are also some accessibility concerns with before and after. Some screen reader will try to vocalize the content, other will ignore them entirely. This inconsistency is problematic. Let's say if the effect is entirely decoratively, colorful shape, I believe it is fine to create them with content string. Okay. For decorative, so if the effect is for decoration only, I believe it's fine to use and create empty content. I believe create with an empty content is fine. That's interesting. Okay, for decoration only. Yes. Combinators. When you think about it, the humble A tag has a lot of different hats to wear. The same elements needs to handle navigation links in the header, as well as inline links in an article. What if we want to only style navigation link? Well, we'll could do that using a combinator. What will we want if to exactly? Well, what if we want to only style navigation links? Well, we could do that using a combinator. Nav A, color red, font weight bold, href and href shop. Is that what if we want to only style navigation links? Well, you can use this combinator exactly, using a specific for that. The humble A tag has a lot of different hats to wear. The same element needs to handle navigation links in the header, as well as inline links in an article. What if we want to only style navigation link? We could do that using a combinator. By putting a space between the nav and an A, we are combining two selectors in a very specific way. We are saying that the style should only apply to A tags that are nested within nav. For the first two links in the snippet qualify, but the last doesn't. So we just only combine that using the Descendant selector. Exactly. Which you translate this into target all or match all anchors that are inside a nav. Alright? And of course, that's what it's doing. In CSS, we can differentiate between children and descendant. Think of a family tree. A child is only one level down from the parents. A descendant might be one level down, 2, 3, okay, any descendant. What if we only want to target children and not deeper descendant? Well, we use this now, the sibling, or the children for that, just using this. So I want to only target is the first child.
So here we have an extremely uninteresting...
This video was recorded using an early version of the code playground. The code is the same, but there's some aesthetic difference.
Interesting shopping list. Looks like we're going to buy some salt and pepper and a few fruits. And this parent list gets broken down because we want more than one fruit with its own little list. And in the HTML tab, we can see that we have two sets of unordered lists. We have our parent list, which has 3 items, and then this third item houses its own unordered list. And something kind of cool, by the way, with HTML lists is that you get this alternative bullet treatment for free. The browser will help you distinguish parent from children list items. But in this case, we have this dotted border style, and it only exists around our parent list items. And we can figure out how that's working by first noticing that we have this class on our unordered list, main list, and that's what we're using over here. This style is just to give things a little bit of, just to make it easier to see, because if I remove this, then everything just kind of crammed together. It doesn't look as nice. But so this is the interesting bit here, right? If I remove this character and just have it space separated, then every list item is given the dotted border, even the list items that are nested within this list item. By adding the greater than symbol, what it does is it says only target list items that are direct children of the main list. And if we go to our HTML, we could actually break this. And this isn't valid HTML, but HTML is really forgiving. If I just throw a div in here and wrap all of this stuff in the div, well, no, nothing has that border treatment. I've effectively broken my styling by invalidating the HTML. Because it has to be a direct child. It's not a special thing with list. It's just anything on this side of the equation has to be a direct parent of anything on this side of the equation. But what if I wanted to do the opposite? What if I only wanted to select and give the border style to sublist items? Well, there's a number of ways we could do that. We could start by just giving this unordered list a class, but we can be a little fancy if we feel like it. And what I'm going to say is, let's look for unordered lists within main list. So I'm just going to put this UL over here. And now I get the opposite effect, because what it's saying is first find all unordered lists within main list. And so main list is not inside of itself, right? So it doesn't match the main list because this has to be a child somewhere down the tree of this. And then once it's found.
So what you're saying here is that apply these rules to all the child elements that are to all the child. Apply this rule to all the child elements from the UL that are a li tag that are within the main list class. And this particular thing is important to describe.
An unordered list within the tree.
So in other words, what you say is that, hey, well, let me look at now at that particular main list. Okay, so the way of how you can actually is try to find this quickly is to say, hey, find out that main list, all right, class that is a parent from the unordered list that is targeting is the first child, all the first child that are a li tag.
Looks for direct children of that list. So it's only targeting the children of this list, and it's targeting this list because it's a child of this list. So to recap, if you just have a space between the two things, then it will target any descendant anywhere down the tree. When you add the greater than symbol, it becomes much more picky, and it only looks for direct children.
It becomes much more picky. The combinators here. Yeah, we briefly talk about that, right? So we also look at the combinators here. So the combinators, okay. Combinators like this, for example. So we have is at least, right? So the most common. So the most common are the descendant selectors, which pick all of them. Okay. Are the descendant selector, which pick all of them. Yeah, the most commons are the descendant selector, which pick all of them. All right. So the child's on one level, the child's of one level, and the next level, and the next level, and so on, and the next level. So the child of one level and the next level and the next, and so on, and so on. Okay, good. And then you have now the first child, no? Another is the first child. Is the child selector. Child selector. Right? The child selector. So you are now more picky about it. Okay, exercise, the recipe ad. In this exercise, we'll update the recipe ad to have styles link. Okay, like this. Here's our criteria. Main article link should have a color of deep link with no underline. With no underline. Hovering with no underline. Hovering will show an underline. Okay, links in the aside should be black. Link in the aside. Okay, main article link should have a color deep link. A deep pink. Okay, so main article link should have a color of deep pink with no underline. Hovering will show an underline. So how you can solve this? By articulating. Well, I want to pick now I want to pick the articles that contains a link and their color so by default I don't want to show is underline. All right, so text, you can say text no underline, something that we're going to see that later. And when on hovering and then defining is the state base, the on hover, you're going to show now the underline. So this is what we're going to do the first. And the second is link in the aside should be black with an underline. Hovering will hide the underline. So here we say, hey, anytime you have an aside, if this is the element, any anchor that is inside of the aside, I want to now remove the underline, all right? And when you hovering it, all right, with a pseudo-class, this is state base rules that I want to apply, then I want to now hide the underline. And we should solve this problem by writing new CSS selectors, not by adding new classes to the A tags. We shouldn't have to modify the A tags at all. Don't forget the semicolon here. So that's pretty straightforward, right? So you have an article and you have now an aside. That this aside is inside of this. So what we want to do is this. We say, hey, select all the article that contains select all the articles that contain is an anchor tag. All right, that contains an anchor tag. All right, where the text, I think the text decoration is known, well, text decoration, underline dotted. How do I remove this? text decoration line, none. All right, so the point of this is to say Text decoration none. Okay. So text decoration none. So first we wanted to say, hey, my article link should have a color of the link with no underline. So text decoration none. All right. Text decoration with no underline. All right, and the color will be is deep pink. All right, and when we hover that, I'm gonna say is on hover a pseudo class, which is hover. I want to is show that the text decoration on the line. All right, yeah, doesn't work, no problem. And the color, oh, and remain that as it is. Okay. So in other words, we have to say is article. Again, it's quite redundant here. Article. Select now this state base, which is this. Yeah, the other is more like SAS. SAS-like and stuff like that. Okay. Okay. And now the other is with the link in the aside should be black. The link in the aside should be black. So I can say, I can be much more specific, or I can simply say any aside element that now has an anchor here, I want to make then link to the aside should be black. So color is black and underline, right? And in hovering will hide the underline. With an underline, just text decoration, this declaration here, underline. All right. And when that is now hover with this state base, I want to keep the color, all right, but say the text decoration will be none. And there you go. Right? Pretty straightforward. We should solve this problem by writing new CSS selector, not by adding new classes to the anchor tag. So, pretty straightforward.
So we have been given a mission, and our mission is to do something fairly common, which is to style links according to their housing, right? So the different links will have different styles depending on their container and their environment. And the context for this problem is a recipe application. I've gone ahead and skipped the pages and pages of unnecessary backstory. And we can see in this little screenshot that we have kind of two links that are shown. We have links that are kind of embedded in the baseline part of the article. They should be a deep pink color. But then we also have this box that has contextual information, and links in this box should be black. I can also, if I play this little clip, see that their hover behavior is a little bit different, where this pink one, no underline by default, but on mouse over, it gets an underline. whereas the one inside this box down here has an underline by default, but when a mouse enters over it, that underline disappears like so much fog in the night. So if I scroll down a little bit, we have that exact same kind of setup, but with purple uninteresting links and a little to-do notice that this is where we have to do our work. Little pro tip too, that these exercise playground things, you can make them bigger by clicking on this little button. And, it helps, like, we can focus in on the problem. So I have these two links, and I think for a lot of people, the instinct is, well, why don't I just create a class for baseline link and a class for aside link, or these aren't very good names, but you get the idea, and just apply those classes where they're needed. So I could put class over here.
But in this case, it's specifically telling us not to do that.
Rememberable, and some solve that article A. So this is saying, give me all of the anchor tags that exist anywhere within the article tag. And I'm going to say that the color should be deep pink and the text decoration should be none. And essentially this just removes the underline that you normally get for free with an anchor tag. When I do that, we'll see that this link over here looks right, but we have two problems. The first is that hover does nothing. And the second is that this link has gone ahead and taken that same color. And I don't know about you, but the contrast of this pink text with this peach puff background is not doing it for me. So we have to do something about that. And let's start with this contrast over here. So the reason that it has this pink text is that this anchor is still inside this article, right? We think about the article, it wraps around everything. So if we were to draw that box, it would include the aside. And this like space separated selector thing means that it doesn't have to be a direct child. Like, it can be anywhere in the tree. We could ask that our direct children of text decoration should go back to being underline. And when I do that, right, it's still technically applying these styles to this link, but it's also applying these styles. And because they're the same kind of selector type, they're the same specificity, it goes just chronologically. So whichever one comes later will be applied. By the way, I should say that the way that I'm writing these styles, just inside a style tag here, it's not how I'd normally do this, right? This is kind of the easiest way to do it in the context of the course platform.
Exactly.
And even the fact that this is contextual based on the order, like the fact that it doesn't work if I do this, that probably seems like a problem, but it won't be a problem once we introduce the tooling that we're going to see. Similarly, where we write the CSS won't be a problem as well. We'll see that in module 3, so hang tight for that. For now, we're just, we're focusing on the styles, not the architecture.
Exactly.
So,
in the style and not the architecture. So that was quite interesting. And that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye-bye.